Hello again everybody, back with another video. This time I wanted to go over the disassembly of the KK500 bolt. My original reviews on the KK500 were about 3 years ago, and a lot of people have watched those videos. I've actually been approached by people at matches who saw me in the video and wanted to ask a few more detailed questions regarding the rifle. Now, one of the things that you may have encountered, especially if you're one of the earlier adopters of the KK500, was there wasn't really that much documentation regarding how to disassemble certain parts of the rifle, especially the bolt. When I got my rifle, it didn't even come with an English manual, but figured it out eventually with some help from some other folks that have these rifles. And I wanted to put together a video. There is one video on YouTube currently that shows the disassembly of the bolt from somebody in Japan, but there's no audio commentary, so they don't go into specific details on any of the parts. So I wanted to do that in this video. So at minimum, these are the tools that you'll need: the cleaning rod guide and the little Walther tool that comes with all of the rifles when you purchase them. So this bolt is already in the position that it would be in as soon as you take it out of the rifle. So you can see that the firing pin is retracted. It's back. You can see it protruding from the end of the bolt here. This would normally signify that the firing pin is cocked in the rearward position, ready to strike the round when you depress the trigger. So what we're going to do is I'm going to decock it using the tool. Okay, so you see that firing pin has disappeared. The end of the firing pin has disappeared. And now it's protruding from the front of the bolt right here. Okay. So to start, we're going to go ahead and unscrew this back portion of the bolt. And this entire piece just comes off. There's nothing inside of it, so you can just put that to the side. Okay, so this little top hat looking kind of piece sits on top of the entire assembly here, and this is the part that protrudes out the back. You can see the firing pin goes through the center of it here. We have a couple of springs, one large spring, firing pin spring. Okay, now here's where you do need a few tools. Nothing major, but you can't take this apart simply with just by hand. So in lieu of an actual punch set, you can use the little Walther tool. So I think, if I can recall correctly, there's a pin that you have to drive out right here. You can see it right there. Okay, so make note of the orientation of it also. So you see I have the bolt, so this is the bottom of the bolt right here, and you can see the handle is at the we'll say the 4.5 o'clock position. Okay, so just remember that for later. So I'm going to use this to drive that pin out. So this was the 2.5 millimeter, and that pin just comes out really easily. So make sure you don't lose this. Okay, now this piece will slide off now that it's not being held on by the pin. And we can take the actual bolt handle off. And there's actually, it's stuck to it, but there's a little washer on the bottom of this. So we'll put that to the side as well. Now the last two bits are the remainder of the bolt body and the firing pin. Now this also is retained by a specific pin here, so I'm going to push that out. you don't have to remove it completely, just get it out of the way, and then you can pull back on the pin and then guide it out. Now I've seen on some bolts this pin just comes out really easy. Mine it doesn't. It actually, you know, it's kind of it stops right there, and it's a really tight fit. So I'm not going to try to force it. Again, you just need to move it out of the way enough to get the firing pin out. And then at this point you can go ahead and clean all of the parts with your favorite cleaner and then lube them up. The only thing I don't pull out the extractors. I don't think that's really necessary. I just give them a good scrub and then get underneath the claws. But other than that, that's the major pieces of the bolt. Now a note, as I have it disassembled, firing pins, and it's always a good idea to have a spare, because if something's going to break, it'll most likely be a firing pin, and it'll always be at the worst possible time, like in the middle of a match. So having a spare firing pin is always good. They're available from Walther, really your local dealer, and you know, nothing major about them except, you know, they're all made in exactly pretty much the same shape and size. But what I found is that small parts like these that go inside other parts sometimes require a little bit of fitting. So when I got my spare, this is actually the spare that was already in there. When I got my spare, I just dropped it in, and then I tried using it in the rifle. And I noticed that when I pushed the bolt forward to try to chamber the round, it felt like it was catching on something. Now, if you look closely, see if it'll focus. But anyways, so the firing pin, this is upside down right now. The firing pin would normally be in this position, and then you push it forward while it's in the bolt to close, to chamber around, and then you lower the handle. This part right here fits into a slot in the receiver when you look at it. And what I noticed between this bolt, or this firing pin and this firing pin, this is the original firing pin that was in my rifle, is that there is a small amount of material here, and on the other side as well, that's been filed away. Okay, so that's where I took my handy needle files. I just took a needle file and I, you know, just went and filed away a little bit of material there so that it matched the contours of the original firing pin. So I did that, dropped it all back in, and then put the bolt back in the rifle, and it just went in with no issues. There was no interference. It didn't feel like it was catching on anything. So if you do end up installing one of these yourself, you know, you might have to do that. And I'll talk a little bit more about this when I have it completely reassembled. So anyways, so reassembly is basically, obviously, the reverse of the assembly, or disassembly, excuse me. So again, this will only go in one way. If you have it in upside down, the firing pin will not line up with the end of the bolt. So we're going to go ahead, push that all the way in, and then make sure it goes forward. The tip of the firing pin should go into the hole. Okay, now the key here is to ensure that this pin here will go into the slot. You can't really see it because I don't have the pin completely out, but you'll see that there's a slot in the firing pin that the retaining pin has to go through. So we'll just make sure you can see it there. You can see this, the lighting changes, but that's the slot right there. So like I said, on other bolts you can just push this in, but mine's tight. So at the minimum, I'm going to use this, one of the plastic padded parts, And I'm just going to tap that home. Okay. So you can see now the firing pin, retaining pin is in, and the firing pin won't come out. And it still has free range of movement because it went through the slot in the firing pin. Okay. So we're going to put this washer back on. And we're going to put the bolt handle. Now remember the positioning. So we had it, so if this is the bottom of the bolt, you wanted this at basically 4.5, the 4.5 position, 4.5 o'clock, or 4:30, excuse me. It's early here. All right. So if you recall, there was a specific positioning regarding this particular piece here, because again, this is retained by a pin and has to go through both the firing pin, the bolt body, and this piece. So you just have to find that specific area where all of that will line up. And you can see right there. So the firing pin is in there, the bolt body, and this piece, they all line up, and you can see light. Well, you should see light right about there. There you go, right there. So this will go through completely. So we'll take that small pin, I'll put it in. Now this one should go in easy. There we go. All right, so we'll put this large spring back over the top here. Again, trying to maintain the handle position at the 4.5. Put the firing pin spring in. And this top hat piece just sits on top. Now what you'll notice is there's a slot. There was a slot at the top of this. So what'll happen is this will go into that slot as you put this piece on top. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So we're gonna just lay that on top. Everything will be it just sits loosely on top. If you can balance it. And then we'll screw this part back on. You might have to do this a couple times just to make sure the alignment's correct. Oops. Okay, that's better. So you see that this part, the top hat piece, is actually rotating along with it, which it'll do to a point. So this is where it gets tricky. So you need to depress this until it slots in to that groove that was in the top of the bolt body. Now you can do this by hand, which I'm trying to do, and you'll just feel it go in. Like I said, this may take a few times until you're used to it, and even after all this time that I've had this rifle, it's still a little bit of an issue for me sometimes. Plus the bolt's all greasy now, so. All right. Okay, there we go. So at some point you'll feel it go in, and then now you'll be able to twist this all the way, and you see it's not spinning anymore. Okay, so now that is completely installed and reassembled. So at this point, see, the firing pin is back in the original position where we started, where it's protruding and you can't see it in the rear. Give it a little twist, you'll see firing pin, the rear of it now shows as we put it back into the position it would be in if we were to install it in the rifle. And the firing pin has retracted. It's no longer showing through the firing pin hole on the bolt. So just make sure that you can twist the handle so it goes to all of the different positions if you were using it left-handed, etc. That there's no binding, that you don't feel that there's any type of interference outside of what you normally would feel. And then I would finish it off by installing it in the rifle and checking it out to make sure that it works. So I'm going to bring the rifle in. Okay. So first off, we'll put it in. And it moves in. I don't feel any bit of interference. This is, as I was speaking earlier when I installed the replacement firing pin, this is the part where it felt like it would catch on something. But here, it goes in smoothly, no issues. And to test that the firing pin will strike around sufficiently, I like to use these for dry firing. These are little plastic drywall anchors. These are the best as far as I'm concerned for dry firing, especially if you dry fire a lot and you practice at home doing a lot of dry fire. I've never had any issues with these. They work very, very well as basically dummy rounds, because you get to practice the loading too, which is really important. You know, some people will use a scat and they'll just lift the handle and then close it again, but you don't get the actual, practice of loading, which you should do, because in the process of loading that can affect your position, etc., and you have to replicate that in training. So I use these. You can see it's about the diameter. The end is a diameter of a 22 round, and it's got a nice little thick rim here that the firing pin will impact. So I'll put one of those in. And then you should be able to see, if it'll focus, there's the indentation on the rim, or on the back end of the drywall anchor, right about. Well, there's a indentation there. There it is. So yeah. So now this is good and ready to go. And now you know how to disassemble and reassemble the bolt and install a new firing pin. So again, this is just good for those people that already have this rifle and still don't know how to take it apart, or if you're considering getting this rifle and you just want to know how complicated that bolt is, since it's an ambidextrous bolt. But there's no big issues, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So thanks for watching again, and we'll see you again soon. So just a little addition to the end of that video, or this video. You saw how I was struggling a little bit with trying to install these last few pieces by hand. Just wanted to show you that it is possible to do it by hand, especially if you don't have any of the tools necessary, or just, a few tools to help. But I wanted to show you the alternate way of doing it that involves a flathead screwdriver, which this actually makes it a lot easier. But, without this, you can still do it by hand in a pinch. It just might take you a couple times. So again, we'll put this top hat piece on. Then we'll start to screw this in. And you see again, it's spinning on it along with the with that rear piece. So eventually you'll feel it come up to a stop, a little bit of resistance, and I'll back it off a little bit. So then we'll take this flathead screwdriver and we'll press down on that piece and then rotate it until it slots in. So then you see it goes in, and then I'll rotate this some more. And you see how much easier that was. So yeah, using the flathead screwdriver would be a lot easier, but again, without it, you can still do this by hand. It's just a matter of being able to press down on this and rotating it with your thumb until you feel it go in, and then you can twist the remaining piece on. So yeah, that's it. And I hope for those of you that have these rifles and still have not taken this apart, I hope now you have the confidence to take it apart. And for those of you considering buying this rifle, no big deal. This may be an ambidextrous bolt and a little bit more intricate, but there's still no issue taking this apart and servicing it regularly. Thank you again for watching.